The Lotus Carlton was a true wolf in sheep's clothing, a four-door family car that rivaled the performance of a Ferrari Testarossa. Born from a bold experiment, this super sleeper immediately sparked controversy among the media, police, and British Parliament, who pushed to have the Lotus banned for good, claiming the rapid acceleration and 180 mph top speed were far too reckless for UK roads, and questioned who would ever need such a vehicle. But for some, it was exactly what they needed. One group of thieves stole a Lotus plated 40RA to commit a string of high-value ram raids, utilizing the ample storage to pack in alcohol and cigarettes before leaning on the twin turbos to leave the police utterly helpless, time and time again, even after robbing a store just 30 yards from a station. As this continued, the thieves became more brazen, the police more frustrated, and the car more infamous, right up until it disappeared, leaving many to question if it's still out there today. This is a story of miles per hour and mystery, of innovation and infamy, and of news stories and, well, nudity. This is the story of the uncatchable car, the 40RA Lotus Carlton. Lotus was founded by Colin Chapman, a talented engineer whose philosophy of simplifying and adding lightness led the company to win the F1 Constructors' Championship 7 times. However, after Chapman passed away, General Motors would acquire the company in 1986 and bring a much more American philosophy in the form of more horsepower. Lotus had worked with car companies all around the world, consulting on projects like the DeLorean, and now GM had tasked them to aid in designing the so-called King of the Hill, the C4 ZR1 Corvette. They figured out the adaptive suspension and dodged restrictions to create the LT5, a 5.7-liter all-aluminum V8 with dual overhead cams, an engine that would pave the way for the legendary LS1. When it came time to launch the car at the 1989 Geneva Auto Show, the president of GM Europe, Bob Eaton, wanted to launch an equally extreme sedan alongside the Corvette, but they only had a few months to build the super sleeper. GM had acquired Opel and Vauxhall back in the 1920s, and originally planned on jamming a V8 into an Opel Senator, a luxurious executive car. But it wouldn't fit, and it didn't make much sense for the brand, so the team changed their focus to another car built under both brands, as the left-hand drive Opel Omega in Germany, and the right-hand drive Vauxhall Carlton in the UK. The twins were well loved, and were voted European Car of the Year in 1987. They had a slippery body with a drag coefficient of just 0.28, and already came in a sportier variant with a 3-liter straight-six engine. And so, with just 6 weeks until the show in Geneva, the Senator plan was scrapped, and the team began building off the Carlton Omega base. With the 3-liter engine stroked to 3.6 liters, a pre-production 24-valve head, and twin turbos, the car produced 377 horsepower and 419 pound-feet of torque, which was more than the V8 ZR1 or pretty much anything available at the time, easily claiming the title for the fastest regular production sedan in the world. They managed to get the 6-speed from a ZR1 to handle the power, the limited slip differential from a Holden Commodore, AP racing brakes, Ronal rims, and a hodgepodge of parts to bring the car to life in time. But when the curtain dropped, the final result was an impressively quick car. There are stories of owners taking their Lotus Carlton Omega to tracks like the Nürburgring and upsetting Ferrari sales reps who were trying to show off their wares before the Lotus sedan would blow by them, turning away potential customers. The Lotus sold for £48,000 back in 1990, and while this was 4 times as much as the base Carlton and considerably more than double what the 24-valve 3000 GSI model cost, it was still a relative bargain when compared to supercars of the day, and claimed a top speed of 176 miles per hour, although there were ways to get around the limiter and reach upwards of 180. However, the juxtaposition of the somewhat innocuous body paired with the breathtaking performance was confusing to some and upsetting to others. The Association of Chief Police Officers called the car an outrageous invitation to speed. The editor of Auto News claimed nobody buying this car could possibly argue he needs or will be able to use the top speeds, and suggested limiting the car to just 155 miles per hour. And then UK Parliament agreed that such speed should only be handled by the likes of famed racing drivers like Fangio and Moss, and criticized Lotus for using the top speed as a marketing tool. But there were other cars out there that could reach the same speeds, yet they didn't seem to generate the same outrage. Instead, it seemed the crux of the concern wasn't the performance of the car, but that it was so much more affordable and not completely out of reach like the supercars of the day. And so, there was a motion to ban the Lotus from being sold. But before this could take place, the car was already dead. It was launched in 1990, right into the recession of the early 90s and a time when people didn't have disposable income for such a car. As a result, the company was unable to hit their target of building 1,100 cars, and stopped production at the end of 1992 having made 950, 630 Lotus Omegas, and 320 Lotus Carltons. While production of the Lotus sedan was short-lived, its legacy was still only beginning. Along with the recession hurting sales, it sparked an increase in thefts, and the method of choice was ram raiding. This consisted of thieves breaking into the stores by smashing right in with the car. The car was usually stolen, so they didn't care if it was damaged, and then they could fill it up and take off. Often, they'd bring one vehicle just to smash in before loading another undamaged vehicle to escape. Some of the more organized thieves would coordinate multiple vehicles to maximize the rewards for their risk, and coordinate with blockers to reduce their chance of being caught. The ultimate vehicle for this crime was of course the Lotus Carlton, and multiple were stolen for this purpose in the 90s. But by far the most infamous was plated 40RA. RA stood for Richard Austin, the owner of the car, and 40 referred to his 40th birthday. Richard was the founder of a computer manufacturing company originally known as Evesham Micros. While many were struggling in the 90s, computer sales were taking off, and Richard had made enough to justify spending £39,000 on the limited Lotus after trading in his Porsche 911.
It was the fastest, biggest, loudest car on the road at the time.
He was in love, and was quoted as saying it was the best car he'd ever had. But on November 26, 1993, thieves targeted his prized possession. They chose to strike at 5 AM, but triggered the Lotus's alarm. Richard sprung from his sleep and yelled at the thieves through the window.
So I opened the window and shouted, "Off you bastards!"
Then he ran downstairs, still fully naked, and grabbed his wife's coat as he went outside to scare them off. However, the plan didn't work.
And as I walked out, this guy just stepped up to me, whack, and I was out, lying on the drive, everything exposed.
The thieves couldn't get the Lotus running, but they disabled the alarm and freed the steering lock so they could roll it out onto the road, and then use a Sierra Cosworth to push the car away from the crime scene until they had more time. Richard regained consciousness to the sound of crunching fiberglass, and hopped in his wife's Renault Espace to give chase.
Shouted to my wife to call the cops, I'm going after them. Which was one of the stupidest things anyone could ever do.
He caught up with the stolen car, which was now sitting at the top of the hill while the group of thieves tinkered with the wiring.
And then I'm thinking, what the hell am I going to do? I'm sat here in a Renault Espace, there's several of them, and I've got no clothes on.
Then, a four-wheel drive Cavalier Turbo started reversing down the hill, aiming directly for Richard. He tried to reverse too, but he couldn't get away in time, and the Cavalier smashed into the Renault.
This car hit me and damaged the front and steam everywhere, and at that point I was definitely defeated.
With the van out of commission, Richard watched as the thieves drove away in his beloved car. It wasn't long before 40RA was seen again, this time driving away after robbing a store filled with alcohol and cigarettes. And then it happened again, and again, and again. The local papers began to publish articles about Richard's ill fortune, the Lotus's ram raids, and the police's inability to catch the car. The amount of raids committed by the car rose to 14, and the thieves became more and more comfortable, even committing a crime just 30 yards from the police station. There's a rumor that at one point the police brought out a helicopter to chase down the thieves, but racing down the M6, not even that was fast enough to keep up with the hopped up sedan. While the cops couldn't catch the Lotus, they were closing in on the thieves, and felt that they had a pretty good idea of who the criminals were. The ram raiders could feel the pressure, and decided to retire the Lotus Carlton to avoid being charged for all the crimes now tied to the sedan supercar. While they probably continued the raids using other cars, they decided to stop pushing their luck with 40RA, and the car disappeared, at least for now. Richard was still a true petrolhead though, and went on to pursue all sorts of motorsports endeavors, but the most interesting was probably the Centura S99. Again, 99 referred to the year, and Centura was an anagram for R. Austin, who had ponied up a large amount of money to build the ambitious track weapon right in Evesham. He started by buying Harrier, and used the chassis to build the Judd V10 powered monster, with the idea of eventually selling the race cars to anyone who wanted to compete in one in the GT1 class of the British GT Championship. For such a unique car and small team, the car had a pretty solid start, claiming 4 podiums in just 8 races, even winning at Silverstone against Porsche 911 GT1s and McLaren GTRs. The car was shipped over to the States, where it raced against prototypes in the American Le Mans Series at Laguna Seca, taking 9th place despite struggling in the heat. Unfortunately, this variant of the GT1 series was canned. The car was denied entry to the 24 Hours of Le Mans, and the Centura business model collapsed, making this the one and only, which is now living in New Zealand. But what about 40RA? Many people have told different accounts of what happened next. Some say the thieves kept the car for themselves, others say they sold it to a scrapyard, and some have claimed to have found the car, pairing photos with intricate stories. Like one theory that the car sat in a police salvage yard for years, before it was fixed and driven until 2009, and then left to rot again before a new owner bought it and restored it in 2014, now with new plates to avoid unwanted attention. However, none of these claims were validated, and were likely completely made up. In reality, it turned out the thieves had driven the car into a nearby ravine. Despite being completely submerged, it wasn't long before the car was found, and just 2 months later it was pulled out, although its roof had been caved in from a barge hitting it. After extracting the vehicle, Richard stopped by to see his favorite car, now completely totaled.
It was in an extremely sorry, battered, horrible, stinky state.
With all of the damage, the car was scrapped.
It was scrapped. It was scrapped.
And so, contrary to many theories floating around, it seemed this really was the end of 40RA. Richard ended up battling with his insurance, and eventually convinced them to buy him another Lotus Carlton. But after a year or so, he sold that one to a friend and tried out some other vehicles, like an Alpina B10, which he also fell in love with. While the original 40RA was no more, many enthusiasts still shared stories of the legendary getaway car, and some even put fake 40RA plates on their Carltons. But then, out of nowhere, the real 40RA plates appeared again, except not on a Carlton, but a range of vehicles, including a lime green electric Kona, which caused quite a stir online.
It's amusement putting on a Hyundai Kona electric in lime green.
It seemed Richard had moved on from his past life, leaving behind the legacy of risky rides for a far more mature, everyday EV. But in 2021, the plates were swapped again, and this time, back to a Lotus Carlton. Richard explained that it obviously wasn't the original car, but that he still wanted to reunite the plates with the Carlton, so he'd fixed up another. Since then, he's been making the most of his new ride, leaning into the history and getting a kick out of all the wild conspiracies.
Some of them have been almost hilarious.
He even plans on bringing it out to the Nürburgring later this year.
We won't be aiming for any marvellous laptops.
He did mention selling the car at one point to work on another Carlton, which led some to believe that he still does have the original. But again, that's a long shot. And for now, Richard is still enjoying the new 40RA Lotus Carlton. Along with 40RA, ram raids have also made a return in the past few years. In New Zealand, the country was averaging over 2 ram raids every single day at one point. But new security measures such as fog cannons, bollards, strobe lights and alarms have been effective in curbing these crimes. Lotus is going to sell another sedan in 2025, but unlike the Carlton, the Amé will be an electric car with over 900 horsepower, a claimed 0 to 60 time of 2.78 seconds, and a top speed of 256 kilometers an hour, which is the fastest in its class, but still slower than the Lotus Carlton Omega, now well over 30 years old, and still an automotive icon. I really hope you enjoyed this story. I started working on this video over a year ago, but with so many theories and sources to check, it took me a while to weed through, and wouldn't have been possible without people like Trevor from Oscar's Garage, who released an awesome, much anticipated interview with Richard just last weekend and gave me permission to use some of the audio. I'll leave a link to his video below, along with another video he made on the car, and a link to Haggerty's video, focusing on the wild origins of the Carlton Omega and the socio-economic waves it created in the UK. As always, thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Every like and subscription really helps out. I hope you enjoyed this video and that you have a great day.